Good evening. You don't need a psychology degree to know that toxic people exist. You've met them. Maybe you've worked for them. Some of us have even loved them. And if you're human, there's a good chance at one point or another you've been one. But here's the truth. Smart people, truly wise and emotionally intelligent people don't just survive toxic relationships. They learn to lead themselves through them with grace, clarity, and strength. And they do it not by fighting fire with fire, but by mastering one thing: response over reaction. Smart people recognize toxicity not because they're paranoid or hyper-judgmental, but because they've learned, often through painful experience, to listen to what most of us ignore: the signals within. That tight feeling in your chest after a conversation, the emotional hangover that lingers hours after a meeting, the dread of a text message from someone who always seems to bring the mood down. These aren't random. These are the body's early warning system. And while many of us are trained to override them, to be polite, to be accommodating, to not overreact, smart people have developed the courage to pay attention, not just to what someone says, but how they make them feel. See, toxicity is rarely obvious at first. It doesn't usually scream in whispers. It disguises itself in jokes that cut a little too deep, in support that comes with strings attached, in criticism disguised as honesty. The coworker who always finds a way to undermine you, just subtly enough that you question yourself. The friend who only shows up when they need something. The partner who dismisses your feelings as too sensitive. These patterns don't feel like fire alarms. They feel like a slow leak in your confidence. And by the time you realize what's happening, it's often already taken a toll. Smart people don't wait until their energy is drained and their self-worth is on life support. They understand that emotions are data. When they feel worse after being around someone repeatedly, they don't dismiss it. They get curious. They ask, why does this interaction leave me feeling small? Why do I dread this call? Why do I second guess myself around this person? They don't rush to label someone as toxic. It's not about blaming. It's about understanding patterns, especially emotional ones. And once they see the pattern, they act. Maybe it's taking a step back. Maybe it's drawing a boundary. But the key is they don't normalize emotional drain. They don't explain it away as just being too sensitive. They don't wear themselves down trying to keep the peace when the cost is their own well-being. Science backs this up. The University of Freiburg study found that people exposed to chronic emotional stress, especially in workplaces or personal relationships, experienced sustained spikes in cortisol levels. That's the stress hormone your body produces in moments of threat. And while it's useful in emergencies, when it stays elevated, it starts to damage your body. We're talking about sleep disruption, weakened immune function, even memory loss. And all of it from staying in environments your body is desperately trying to tell you to leave. I once spoke with a young woman named Dana, who told me she didn't realize how unhealthy her relationship was until she spent a weekend away with friends. For the first time in months, she laughed freely. She slept deeply. She didn't have to walk on eggshells. It hit her like a wave. This is what life is supposed to feel like. When she returned home, nothing had changed, except her awareness. And that awareness gave her the courage to start making different choices. That's the gift of recognizing toxicity early. It gives you your power back. It gives you options. It gives you time to act before the damage goes too deep. We are all impacted by the people we allow close. And while we can't always avoid toxicity, we can choose not to entertain it. Smart people don't wait for collapse to make a change. They notice the early signs. They trust their intuition. They respect themselves enough to say something doesn't feel right here, and then they listen. That's not being reactive. That's being wise. That's how you protect your peace without apology. And that's how smart people begin, not just to survive toxic people, but to outgrow them. It's one of the most difficult lessons we ever learn, that love, kindness, and patience alone are not always enough to change someone, especially someone who doesn't want to. Smart people don't come to this realization overnight. It usually comes after they've tried everything, after they've poured their energy, time, and emotional bandwidth into someone who keeps hurting them, and at some point, they reach the edge. Not the edge of bitterness, but the edge of clarity, the moment where they realize that it's not their job to rescue someone who's determined to stay drowning. There's a powerful instinct in many of us to help. We want to believe that if we just show someone enough grace, if we just communicate better, if we're more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, that person will finally see the light. They'll change. They'll stop the passive-aggressive comments, the manipulation, the self-destruction. But that idea, while beautiful in theory, becomes a trap when applied to toxic people. Because toxic people often aren't looking to grow. They're looking for control or attention. And if you're constantly adjusting yourself in hopes they'll eventually treat you better, you're not helping them, you're enabling them. Smart people learn this difference. They stop trying to be therapists in relationships where they are supposed to be equal. They stop confusing being compassionate with being a doormat. They don't believe that love means tolerating dysfunction indefinitely. They understand that boundaries are not barriers to connection. They're the foundation of healthy relationships. She was a rising star in her company, but for years she let one coworker derail her confidence. Every time she presented in a meeting, he found a way to undermine her ideas. When she succeeded, he would casually suggest she got lucky. She thought, maybe if I'm kinder, maybe if I keep including him, he'll change. She kept giving him chances, kept staying silent to keep the peace, but the peace never came. The turning point came when she stopped trying to make him like her and started documenting every interaction. She stopped centering his comfort and started protecting her credibility. Within months, she was leading her own team, and that toxic coworker, he was finally held accountable. Her breakthrough didn't come from fixing him. It came from refusing to lose herself. This is what smart people understand, that your peace is not a sacrifice you make for someone else's dysfunction. That walking away from someone who is emotionally harmful isn't a failure of compassion, it's a victory of self-respect. You can love someone from a distance. You can wish the best for them without keeping them in your inner circle. You can have empathy without being responsible for their healing. Too many people stay too long in toxic situations out of the hope that if they just do more, try harder, give a little extra grace, things will finally improve. But the truth is, when someone shows you over and over again that they aren't willing to grow, believe them. Smart people do. Not out of cynicism, but out of wisdom. I've learned that not everyone can be saved. And more importantly, not everyone is ours to save. Letting go isn't giving up. It's moving on without the weight that was never yours to carry. It's saying, I won't lose myself trying to carry someone who refuses to walk. It's not about abandoning people. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. That is how smart people lead. That is how they protect what matters most. We often think of boundaries as barriers, walls built to keep people at a distance. But smart people know better. They understand that boundaries aren't about shutting others out. They're about holding ourselves in. They're not about controlling other people. They're about protecting what we value: our time, our peace, our priorities, and our sense of self. Boundaries are not a reaction to conflict. They're a declaration of self-awareness. And smart people don't set them out of anger. They set them out of clarity. The truth is, most of us are never taught how to set healthy boundaries. We're taught to be nice, to say yes when we want to say no, to be agreeable, even when it costs us our peace. So we stay quiet when someone crosses the line. We laugh off comments that cut deep. We go along to avoid rocking the boat. And eventually, we wonder why we feel resentful, drained, even lost. Smart people learn to recognize this pattern. They realize that if you don't define your boundaries, someone else will, not because they're cruel, but because people will always treat you based on the limits you do or do not enforce. If you're always available, they'll always call. If you never say no, they'll never stop asking. If you never speak up, they'll assume it doesn't bother you. But here's the beauty of boundaries. They don't require drama. They don't require a fight. They require honesty. And when practiced with intention, they actually strengthen relationships because they make expectations clear. A smart person doesn't wait till they're burned out to speak up. They say early and simply, this is what I'm comfortable with, or I need time for myself today, or I'm not okay with being spoken to that way. And they do it without apology. Setting boundaries isn't cold or selfish. It's responsible. You wouldn't leave the doors to your home wide open to anyone who wanted to walk in. Your mind, your heart, your schedule, they deserve that same protection. And it's not about shutting out everyone who challenges you. It's about shutting out the patterns that drain you, disrespect you, or distract you from your purpose. Take Ava, for example. She loved her job and her friends, but every week she found herself sucked into the same pattern. A colleague who constantly called after hours with non-urgent issues. A friend who only showed up to complain, never to connect. It wasn't until Ava began setting gentle but firm limits, choosing when she'd answer calls, steering conversations to healthier ground, that she began to feel her energy return. And something surprising happened. The people who respected her boundaries stayed. The ones who didn't faded away. Boundaries, when done right, reveal who values you and who values what you give them. The most powerful thing about boundaries is that they remind us we have a choice in how we spend our time, a choice in what kind of relationships we invest in, a choice in what we allow into our emotional space. Smart people make these choices intentionally. They don't leave their well-being up to chance. They draw a line, not to isolate, but to protect. And when someone pushes back, as they often do, smart people don't panic. They don't back down just to keep the peace. They understand that peace built on silence isn't peace, it's pressure. And they've learned that the people worth keeping in their life will respect the line, not resent. Boundaries are how we teach others to love us, not perfectly, but respectfully. They are how we stay whole in a world that constantly pulls us in different directions. Smart people don't wait for a crisis to set them. They build them early, maintain them consistently, and do so with love, not just for others, but for themselves. There's a quiet kind of strength that comes when you stop needing to have the last word, when you stop chasing explanations from people who never intended to give, when you no longer feel the urge to prove your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding you. That strength is called detachment, and smart people master it, not because they're cold or indifferent, but because they've learned the cost of staying emotionally entangled with people who drain them. Detachment is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of self-respect. It's choosing to preserve your peace instead of diving into battles that have no end, no resolution, and no real purpose. Smart people understand that not every insult needs defending, not every betrayal needs unpacking. They don't waste their energy rewriting history with someone who's already chosen to forget the truth. Instead, they redirect that energy toward healing, growing, and protecting what matters most, their emotional well-being. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to engage, say some, fight back, demand answers. But there is power in silence. There is wisdom in knowing when not to reply. Because sometimes the loudest message you can send is your absence from the chaos. Smart people realize that toxic individuals often feed on reaction. The more attention you give to their behavior, whether through anger, tears, or desperation, the more control they feel they have. Detachment starves that cycle. It says, I see what you're doing, and I choose not to participate. Think of detachment like emotional minimalism. You stop holding on to grudges that no longer serve you. You stop revisiting arguments in your mind, trying to say the perfect thing that will finally make them understand. You stop carrying someone else's insecurities, projections, and manipulation as if they're yours to fix. Smart people don't carry what isn't theirs. They stop renting out space in their mind to people who haven't earned the right to live there. I once met a man who had spent years trying to get closure from a business partner who betrayed him. He kept replaying conversations, rereading emails, trying to make sense of it all, but the more he searched for meaning, the more stuck he became. It wasn't until he stopped needing an apology, stopped needing the perfect explanation, that he realized the betrayal said more about the other person's character than his own. That's the power of detachment. You take your dignity back without needing someone else to hand it to you. Smart people understand that detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about yourself enough to stop giving energy to what only takes from you. It means you've outgrown the need to react to every provocation. You've outgrown the belief that closure must come from someone else. And you've learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is quietly walk away, without fanfare, without explanation, without looking back. The most powerful thing you can say to a toxic person is nothing at all, not because you're passive, but because you've chosen a higher path. You've chosen to be unbothered, not because it doesn't hurt, but because your peace is no longer negotiable. You've decided that your energy is too valuable to spend on people who only bring confusion and conflict. Detachment is the art of letting go without needing anyone's permission.
It's the quiet confidence that says, I don't need to win this argument. I don't need to fix this person. I don't need to prove myself in this moment. I just need to walk in truth, protect my peace, and keep moving forward. That's what smart people do, and that's why there's something strange about pain. It has a way of becoming the thing we wish we could erase, while also shaping the parts of us we're most proud of. Toxic people, for all the damage they can cause, have this unexpected ability to reveal what we stand for. They push us to the edge of what we'll tolerate. They show us who we are when tested, and smart people, instead of letting those experiences define them, choose to let them refine them. They grow not in spite of the pain, but because of it. No one enjoys being hurt. No one wakes up hoping to deal with betrayal, manipulation, or emotional abuse. But once it happens, once the fog clears, smart people ask the questions that most are afraid to ask. What did that experience reveal about me? Where did I ignore my instincts? Where did I give too much? Stay too long, remain too quiet. Toxic encounters force a mirror in front of us. Sometimes what we see is uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. We start to realize where our boundaries were too loose, where our desire to please outweighed our sense of peace, where we settled, not because we didn't know better, but because we didn't believe we deserved better. Smart people don't run from that reflection. They sit with it. They get honest with themselves, and then they grow. I once met a man who told me his most defining leadership lesson came from the worst boss he ever had. This boss was condescending, petty, and made a habit of publicly humiliating his team. At the time it felt unbearable, but years later, after that man had moved on and built his own team, he said something I'll never forget. Every day I lead by asking myself, what would he have done? And then I do the opposite. That toxic leader taught him everything he needed to know, by being a living example of what not to become. Today that man leads with kindness, transparency, and trust. His team is loyal not because they fear him, but because they respect him. And it all began with one painful encounter that became his greatest teacher. Growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like subtle shifts. Choosing to speak up next time, choosing to walk away sooner, choosing to trust yourself even when others dismiss your feelings. Toxic people don't get the credit for your growth, but they do get the role of catalyst. Smart people take what was meant to break them and build something stronger with it. They stop asking, why did this happen to me, and start asking, what can I do with this now? That shift from victim to student is where the power lives. It doesn't mean the hurt vanishes, but it means the hurt doesn't get the final word. It becomes part of your story, not the whole story. Some of the most emotionally intelligent people you'll ever meet have been through hell, not because they liked it there, but because they refused to leave empty-handed. They didn't just survive toxic people, they took notes. They turned patterns into lessons. They turned pain into empathy. They became the kind of friend, leader, and partner they once needed. Smart people don't let toxic experiences harden them. They let them shape their clarity, their standards, their strength. They grow not because the path was easy, but because they chose to use every part of it. That's how they move forward, not bitter, not broken, but better at knowing themselves, better at choosing their people, better at building a life that reflects who they truly are, because that's the real victory, not just getting away from toxicity, but rising so far above it, it can no longer reach you. There's something profoundly liberating about realizing that no one, not even the most toxic person, gets to decide how you show up in your life. You are not helpless in the face of their chaos. You are not doomed to absorb their pain, their drama, their pattern. You are not too fragile to set a boundary. You are not too broken to walk away, and you are certainly not too small to rise above it. You are not powerless. You've never been. Toxic people thrive when we forget our agent. When we hand over our time, our attention, our worth, hoping that maybe if we just love them enough, or explain things just right, things will change. But here's the truth. Change doesn't come from losing yourself to someone else's dysfunction. It comes from finding the courage to choose differently, to choose awareness, to choose stillness, to choose peace. Even when chaos knocks on your door and demands your reaction, you always have a choice, and that's where your power lives. You can recognize toxicity when it starts to creep in, not just in others but in yourself. You can feel the shift in your energy. You can trust the unease in your gut, the heaviness that settles after a conversation that didn't feel right, and you don't have to justify it to anyone. Recognition is the first step, and it's a brave one. You can detach. You can let go of the need to fix, to be liked, to win the argument, or get the apology you may never receive. Detachment is not a loss. It's a gain. You reclaim space in your mind, in your heart, in your future. You learn that silence is not weakness. It's wisdom. You can protect your peace, not with walls but with intention. You can choose who has access to your time, your energy, your attention. You can stop pouring into people who only leave you empty. You can draw the line, not to shut people out, but to keep yourself anchored in your values. Peace doesn't happen by accident. It's built choice by choice. And perhaps most importantly, you can take everything toxic people tried to take from you, your voice, your clarity, your joy, and rebuild something stronger. Not in spite of what happened, but because you chose to learn from it. That growth may be quiet, it may take time, but it's real, and it lasts. The smartest people in the room are not always the ones who speak first, or shine brightest. They're the ones who remain grounded when the ground is shaking. They're the ones who know how to be kind without being walked on. They're the ones who can hold space for others, without letting it consume them. They know who they are and they protect that. Smart people aren't defined by their ability to avoid toxic people. That's not always possible. Life is messy and sometimes they show up in your workplace, your family, or your past. But what sets smart people apart is what they do with that experience. They don't react with rage or fall into bitterness. They respond with clarity, with boundaries, with wisdom. So the next time someone tries to pull you into their storm, take a moment, take a breath, and remember, you are not their storm. You don't have to match their energy. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to dance to the same destructive rhythm. You are allowed to choose still. Smart people don't react. They respond. And in that response, they take back everything that ever tried to steal their power.